What's good, everybody? This is old Papa G coming with another video for you guys. Today we're going to do a guide on SpellBreak, the new battle royale that just came out that uses spell gauntlets specifically instead of guns. I think it's really interesting, and I'm going to make a guide to help you guys out. First off, we're going to go through the runes. Runes is basically the special ability that you could pick up. First off, we're going to do invisibility. For this, I picked all the legendary versions. Invisibility says it right in the name. Gives you invisibility, 6-second cooldown. I think it's pretty good depending on what gauntlet you're using. Next up, you saw the dash rune, which gives you a little dash forward. What's good about it is it's a really quick cooldown of 3 seconds. Next up is Featherfall, which is one of my favorite, definitely top 3. Gives you a big boost in the air without jumping, and it makes it extremely hard for them to hit you. Next up, we have Spring Step. Type of dash, but instead it makes you bounce up in the air. It makes you really hard to get targeted, and I would say it's definitely within the top 5. Right there, what you just saw is my personal favorite, if not second favorite, 1A to 1B. It's called the Flight Rune. It lasts a really long time, the legendary version, almost 5 seconds in the air, and it's extremely quick. Next up, we got Blood Rune Wolf. It gives you a slight power boost, and it gives you the ability to see through walls, so depending on the situation that you're in, it gives you a really big advantage against your opponent. And lastly, my favorite, like I said, 1A, 1B, is the Teleportation Rune. You get to mark exactly where you want to go, and then you teleport right to it. It's really efficient. Next up, we have our gear. What you just saw first was the amulets. Each amulet ranking from uncommon all the way up to legendary gives you plus 10 mana each. It's extremely important. What you're looking up now is the boots. Every upgraded boot gives you an additional plus 1 speed because there's no sprinting in the game. So this is extremely crucial that you get a better pair of boots so that you could run. Lastly, what you're looking at is the belt. The belt gives you armor. Each belt gives you plus 20 armor. You cannot use shields until you get a belt. So they are extremely crucial for your playing ability. Now we're going to get into the gauntlets, and we're going to get into the combos of gauntlets, because each gauntlet can work with or cancel out other gauntlets. So it's really, really crucial that you know these combinations and what works together and what cancels out one another. So we'll get right into that now. So first that you're seeing the fire gauntlet. And I'm going to go over all the different combos and cancels. So first, fire and ice. A fireball will melt any ice on the ground. It will break ice blocks too. The flame wall and ice ball can also be put out by hitting it with an ice attack. These are polar opposite abilities that cancel each other out. Fire and lightning. A lightning strike near a flame wall will go straight through it. However, fireballs will pull in lightning and weaken it. So it's a good thing to know. Here's my personal favorite combination, fire and toxic. Fireballs will explode when combined with toxic cloud. The flame wall will have an individual section turned into toxic sections when hit with a toxic shot. Hitting fire into the toxic puddles does the same thing on a smaller scale. So if your primary gauntlet is the toxic, and you have your puddles on the floor, and you shoot it with your secondary gauntlet with the fire, it makes them explode and turn on fire. It's really, really good combination. Next, we got fire and stone. The boulder attack will set ablaze if it runs through any type of fire. Once you have a firewall active, shockwave attacks will turn into fiery fissures that passes through the wall. So basically, the fissure goes right through the wall, and it's extremely effective because now it turns that whole fissure length into all flame. So anyone that steps in it is now going to get a damage over time effect. Lastly to cover, we got fire and wind. The whirlwind attack will absorb fireballs and turn it into a complete fire tornado for extra damage. It's a big deal. The tornado can explode too if it's hit with a toxic attack. So that fire tornado getting hit by anything toxic will make it explode for big damage and AoE. And lastly, the wind shear attack will pass through both puddles and flame walls. So it's good to keep aware of all the different combinations with fire, because fire seems to be one of the most common things used because it's also a straight attack. As you can see here, the wind shears go right through that basically put out the firewall, so it's also like a cancellation in its own sense. Next up, we're going to go over the Toxic Gauntlet. When it's your primary, instead of just shooting it on the floor, as you can see there, it leaves a puddle. So first, we're going to go Toxic and Ice Gauntlet combos. So Toxic Spray can hit ice puddles and turn them into toxic puddles. This emits toxic clouds that can damage the players. These clouds can also block ice lances if timed correctly. Flash Freeze can completely neutralize toxic puddles and make them ice. When you turn them into ice, you could also use them as basically ice skates. You could skate across it, as you can see there, and it makes you quicker. A toxic cloud will turn into useless solid ice when hit by an ice lance, as you'll see right now. It basically neutralizes it completely. So, in a way, ice is a really good counter to toxic, but they also kind of work together if your toxic is your primary gauntlet and you're using ice to freeze it and you're just skating along. So it is pretty crucial to have. Next up, we're going to do Toxic and Lightning Gauntlet combos. Toxic Spray interacts with electricity when hit by lightning. The conduct lightning, which damages other players. So as you'll see now, it becomes like a big conductor, basically, because it's water. The poison acts as water. A lightning strike will electrify either toxic puddles or clouds. The result damages players within a 10-meter radius. So that right there, what you're seeing, can hit for a 10-meter radius. This is one of more effective combinations with toxic. So it's something to think about if you're using toxic as your primary to try to find a lightning gauntlet. Even if it's a rare and not a legendary, it might work better than something else like wind, for instance. Next up, we have Toxic and Fire, which we kind of just went over briefly before. Both flame puddles and the flame wall will combine with toxic shots. This is very noticeable by players, though. Okay. So it's really noticeable by players. So you've got to act quickly on it, and since it's noticeable, people will try to avoid that scenario because it's a big explosion, just like you just seen. The flame wall can become toxic, but it also blocks the shots from passing through them. So that's something to be aware of. A toxic cloud will become a fiery cloud with more damage if it gets hit by a fireball. So something else to consider. Toxic and wind. The tornado can be turned into a toxic tornado, and it sprays toxic around. So that's one thing. And as you saw before, when you have a toxic puddle and you shoot the wind sneer at it, it turns it into a gas. So people that walk over the gas now are getting a damage over time effect on them. And lastly, what was it? I'm sorry. Toxic and Stone. They don't really work well together, but the shockwave does get rid of all puddles on the floor, so it's something to consider. Now we have the Wind Gauntlet. Wind and Toxic we just went over. Wind and Fire. As you saw earlier with a firewall, the wind shoots right through it, and a wind tornado can be turned into a fire tornado. So we went over that earlier. I just gave a brief cover-up. Now, Wind and Lightning. Wind can become a conduit to lightning if it passes through it. Once a wind shear passes through lightning, it will shock a player on impact. As you could also see, the tornado turns into a lightning tornado, which does huge damage for wind. That's probably the highest damage for wind that you can do. Next up, Wind and Ice Gauntlet combo. Wind shear will destroy ice puddles on contact. So that's really good to know. Any type of puddle, the wind is going to break it off. The edge of a flash freeze, which is the special version attack for ice, attack will block wind shears entirely. So again, it almost counters it out. Ice seems to be the counter of almost all things. It's really, really good as a counter, but it's a little bit harder to use because it doesn't shoot as fast as the other things. It's more precision based, like using a sniper. And lastly, a tornado. Wind tornado will misguide the aims of ice lances. So if you have a tornado and they're trying to shoot through with the ice lance, it may shoot off direction and basically cause a misdirection, as you're seeing right there. And one last thing for wind and earth gauntlets really do not work together at all. They're basically opposites. It's not a good combination. I do not recommend it at all. So we did go over fire earlier, but one thing I missed that I wanted to show you, I did mention it, but I wanted you to actually see it, was the fissures going through the firewall. As you can see there, it brings a straight shot, so that way it does damage outside of the wall itself. So next up, we're going to go over the ice gauntlet. We went over earlier the ice and lightning combo. When a lightning strike hits an ice lance, it will electrify the water briefly. This is a strong attack effect. Lightning bolts are also electrified when they hit ice puddles. So it's something else to consider because it's basically like a conductor. We went over the ice and fire, how they offset one another. Ice and toxic, we also went over this, how they offset one another, how the big, how you could slide with it, and the big cloud, however you want to call it, that the fire uses to make it explode, ice actually neutralizes it and freezes it. We went over that earlier, but I just wanted to go over it again for you. Something else I mentioned earlier, but here's a visual, is you have your whole ice layout. When you hit it with the wind, it turns it into puddles. So now, for other players, when you accidentally do this or you did it on purpose, now it could be a conductor for electricity. So you have to be careful when you do stuff like that because everything does work together. Next up, we have the stone gauntlet. Now, keep in mind when you have the stone gauntlet that you can't do any aerial attack with it. So your secondary would become all your aerial work. I'm just letting you know. So if you jump in the air, you're trying to run away, stuff like that, you won't be able to use it as freely. Pretty much we went over everything about stone, but I'll give a brief overlay. Any puddles on the floor with ice, stone will break through it. And as you saw with the fissure, it goes right through the firewall. And with the toxic, it breaks away all toxic puddles. Now, lastly, here's the lightning gauntlet. Pretty much the same thing. We went over everything because it all works together, but I just want to show you it as a primary. That's why I'm doing it, and I'm reiterating what I'm saying. Lightning and ice, it becomes a conductor with the ice puddles. Lightning and fire, lightning bolts can pass straight through firewalls, so you don't have to worry about that. Lightning and toxic, a lightning bolt can be blocked by toxic clouds, and it does the same to toxic puddles as the conductor. Lightning and stone boulders will block lightning bolts, so that's something to consider. It's a good counter. And lightning and wind, a lightning bolt that hits a whirlwind will become an electrified tornado, which we saw earlier when I had wind as the primary. Basically, your primary gauntlet has an additional ability than your secondary gauntlet. So that's it for today's guide. So I hope you actually watch this because it is actually a big help. I looked up all this stuff and it was a really big help to me and becoming better and just having a better idea of what I wanted to put together while playing against other opponents. And just by knowing this little information, it definitely gives you an advantage over everybody else. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it as always.